So thanks so much everyone for joining us, both our alumni and students who are here today. My name is Molly Green. I'm the Career Education Coordinator with SuccessWorks. So I'll just be your moderator today. So students, if you have any questions, you can feel free to include those in the chat, and I'll be sure to ask those, or you can raise your hand and ask them as well. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So today we're talking all about publishing. We have some fantastic alumni with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you each to introduce yourselves. If you want to talk a bit about what got you started in publishing, what is it that you do now in your role, and any kind of tips that you have for current students who may be interested in publishing as a career path. Maybe take 3 to 5 minutes each. And Linda, if you don't mind going first, I'll turn it over to you.
Am I shared?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Linda Kaplan. I am the subsidiary rights director of a small literary agency. Subsidiary rights is the exploitation of rights like translation or UK or audio or film rights, and I handle about 150 books a year for my agency and other small agencies. I got started in publishing because my dad and his brothers owned a bookstore and a wholesale magazine and newspaper business in La Crosse and Rochester, Minnesota. So my first job in publishing, I like to say, was handling paperback books and taking the covers off and returning those for credit. I went to the Denver publishing course after the University of Wisconsin. I had worked at the Daily Cardinal and thought I wanted to be in journalism, but then in the end decided to come to New York and be in publishing. So my first job happened to be a subsidiary rights assistant job, and I didn't know what that was. I, of course, wanted to be an editor because that's the only thing people think of about publishing. So I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I've worked at Disney, Random House, Simon & Schuster, companies that are now owned by other companies. And I actually used to work with Emily, who's another one of our panelists, when we worked at Clarkson Potter together, which is part of Random House. I travel to 3 international book fairs every year, to London, Bologna, and the Frankfurt book fairs. Those are big international trade shows with publishers from all over the world who come and meet with fellow book enthusiasts, all business to business, and we talk about the books that are coming up, and then we negotiate contracts over the next couple of months before book publication to have books come out in German or in France, in Indian languages in India, so all over the world. I've worked with presidents, I've worked with cookbook authors, I've done a lot of different kind of books through the years, which keeps things very interesting, both adult and children's, and I think that's my whole story.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Linda. Since you have worked with Emily in the past, why don't we turn it over to you, Emily, if you want to give an introduction.
Hi, am I on screen?
Yes, everything seems to be working.
Hi, I'm Emily Takoudes. I went to UW-Madison. I got there in 1995. I was actually a 22-year-old adult student when I started and graduated when I was 25. And then I moved to New York City shortly thereafter. I knew I wanted to work in book publishing, had 0 connections, and somehow my uncle let me know that he had gone to high school many, many years ago with someone who was an editor And I did an informational interview with her, which was extraordinary. And that basically means just catching 30 minutes of an editor's time and asking them about their job and what they do. And it's a great way to get on a publishing company's radar, because someday an opening might come up. So she was wonderful and connected me to a lot of people in town. And I was very lucky and got my first job and my first interview, which was at Little Brown. And like Linda, I started as an assistant working on paperback books. And I was at Little Brown for about 4 years, working on basically the paperbacks, which is the reissues of the hardcovers that follow a year later, a sort of reinvention of the books, if you will. And then I went to Simon & Schuster, where I became a junior editor and found a focus on nonfiction. I had the privilege of working with Jimmy Carter. Here's his book, The Hornet's Nest, a novel, which was a great, great honor for me. And I worked on a lot of books about history, politics, current events, this sort of thing, some cultural affairs as well. And then I went to Echo, which is part of HarperCollins, and Cassie was at HarperCollins when I was there. And that was wonderful because I kind of came into my own as a full editor, became a senior editor, and my focus was still nonfiction, but it certainly broadened into all different kinds of categories, including memoir, and I was assigned a cookbook. I was told that the great New York French chef Daniel Boulud had a book under contract, and I was going to be the editor of it, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. This was in 2005, and that sort of lit a fire under me, and now I am a cookbook editor, and this is my career path, and this is what I've been focusing on all this time. So that's an example of how you just don't really know where your career is going to end up. Something might fall in your lap, and you run with it. And it ends up becoming your professional life's work. So from there, I went to Random House, to Clarkson Potter, where I had the great honor of working with a number of New York Times bestselling authors, with Alice Waters of Chez Panisse, with Food Network stars, with Martha Stewart Living Magazine. It was wonderful. I was there for many years, and then I had the opportunity to go to Phaidon, which had traditionally been a European book publisher, was opening an office in New York, and they were looking for an executive editor to take on leading the cookbook program from New York. And at Phaidon, we had been considered an art book publisher for a very long time, and cookbooks are actually quite a new category. So it was exciting for me to be a part of something that had a storied legacy, but was also something new at the same time. And we publish globally, so I have the opportunity to work with chefs all over. I've got chefs in Russia, Iceland, Japan, East Coast, West Coast, Latin America. And my role is a little different than other editors, where I'm commissioning projects. So I'm always on the lookout for who I want to work with and books that I want to put together. And a big part of my job is always being on the search for those people, trying to woo them, negotiating the deals, developing the projects with them very closely, and then overseeing the projects through publication. So it's turned out to be a very rewarding career. Yeah, that's the gist of it for me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emily. So last but not least, I'll turn it over to Cassie.
Hi, I'm Cassie Jones. I'm from the world's tiniest town in Wisconsin, so we don't even have a stoplight. Went to the University of Wisconsin, graduated, and in college I worked at the University of Wisconsin Press, and I don't know whether they still hire students, but that was just an absolutely transformative, wonderful experience. 3 years there, working first in the journals department and then in the marketing department of the academic books. And from there I went to the Radcliffe Publishing course, which is now the Columbia Publishing course. And from there, I got my first job at Simon & Schuster. And it's funny that Emily, it's just so funny hearing, because Emily and I have had kind of similar career paths in various ways. And I too started out working on history and politics, and honestly, things that didn't interest me all that much. I kind of went into publishing assuming that I would work on literary fiction because that's what you think. And I quickly found out that that was not the job I had. And, from there, I went to Golden Books briefly, which is a children's company. We started an imprint that did books of adult interest, and that failed miserably, but gave me a lot of great experience. That's also a very common thing in publishing. Things start, things stop, but you just learn what you can as you go. And from there, I went to HarperCollins, where I've been for 21 years. And just a really, really terrific experience. Like Emily, I didn't start out doing cookbooks. I think I did my first one in like 1999 or something. And it's just so much fun. And I realized, and I'm sure Emily, the same thing was with you, I loved editing words. I loved working with words. I still do. But that experience of working with something that's highly visual, something that has a lot of different components and moving parts, I just found to be the most delightful thing. So today I do a lot of cookbooks. It's probably 60% of my list. Big name authors like Ree Drummond and Joanna Gaines. But I also do some other visual books. I work with Nathan Pyle of Strange Planet on his comic books, which are really fun. And I did a memoir this last fall with Jenna Bush Hager. So I do quite a few memoirs. One fiction author who's Gregory Maguire, who wrote Wicked, who is the delight of my life. If I'm going to have one fiction author, that's who I want it to be. And that's basically it. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful career path that basically you're working with smart, interesting, fun people all the time. And I did want to make the point that although everyone, as Linda says, they seem to think they want to be an editor, we work with wonderful people all the time in all sorts of different departments: publicity, marketing, book design, copy editing, and proofreading. And it's a really good thing to do, to think beyond just editorial. That may be truly your path, but there are smart, interesting people doing all the different kinds of work.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cassie. And I just want to mention, Jacqueline put in the chat here, University of Wisconsin Press still hires students, and Jacqueline
awesome.
is currently one of the acquisitions assistants there. So very cool connection. Oh, Jacqueline, I just saw you turned your camera or your microphone on.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say hello. I think, and I guess I'm a grad student in the English department, and I am actually done with my dissertations. Well, I will defend soon, in a couple weeks. But I just wanted to say that since I will be graduating, UW Press is looking for a new assistant. So I'm just putting that out there. If anyone's interested in, getting their feet wet in publishing and in Madison, yeah.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Jacqueline, for sharing that. So if anyone's here and interested in something like that, definitely look into it. So for all the students in the room, feel free to put any questions in the chat or raise your hand if you wanna speak up and ask those. But I want to start off with a question. Going off of Jacqueline bringing up where you're currently working on campus, what are some opportunities that you all pursued when you were in your undergraduate experience? And you talked about this a little bit. Opportunities that you pursued as an undergraduate that were helpful for you, or anything else that was really helpful in your career, such as networking. I know that Emily talked about informational interviewing. So this is kind of one big question to say, what are your biggest tips for students starting out and trying to go into this career path?
I would say I write to people, even now, if I want to network, and I always say, would you be open to having a conversation? Because very few people are going to say no to a question like that. And I just, in the last 2 weeks, talked to someone who contacted me through a friend of a friend of a friend. And, you can give someone 15 minutes. It's not I walk outside and talk to them. And especially now I'm not in back-to-back meetings. But I worked, as I said, I worked at the Cardinal, and then I was a typesetter for a short time. And then when I came to New York, I was a freelance copy editor just to make money. And I was in major publishing houses who hire a lot of freelancers. And so I kind of got an idea of what books each imprint were doing. I think that was, just as Cassie said, when I worked in-house, I worked with production, copy editing, publicity, marketing. You work with all these different people, and you do get a great overview of the industry. So don't dismiss anything other than editing.
I'll also chime in.
I was just going to say quickly, in terms of majors, I feel like a lot of people think that publishing is where English majors go when they don't want to teach and they don't want to be a librarian, which was also true of me. But my current assistant was a poli-sci major with a Japanese minor. So it's certainly, and I think that breadth of different majors and different interests is hugely, hugely helpful.
I agree.
I'll add to that as well. I was a history and women's studies major, and that was simply because by the time I hit the 2-year mark, those were the classes I was taking, and I was halfway to those majors. And yes, so I also did not have any English or creative writing background before I came. Yeah, I think my school jobs, let's see, I worked at the Helen White Library as a checkout girl. I thought at some point that I would want to be in children's book publishing, so there was a wonderful public school that had an incredible children's library, and I shelved books there for a couple years and just got myself really acquainted with kind of the children's library authors and publishers. I had a summer internship. I did 2 summer internships. One was at a place called Lancet, which happened to be in LA, and they signed up the rights, the subsidiary rights to children's books to turn them into films. So there was a lot of reading books and considering their potential outside of the book sphere. And then I also worked at just a tiny, tiny independent press doing whatever they needed, proofreading, writing bios, mailing things to authors, communications. And yeah, just snippets from those little jobs were really, really valuable in giving me a sense of what I thought I might like to do or maybe not like to do. And it just helped, frankly, for my first real interview. I wasn't starting 100% from scratch. I had these little nuggets to work with.
Excellent.
Well, I don't know about Cassie and Emily, but you know, when I look at resumes, I've probably hired 30 assistants over the years. I usually look at whether they've worked during school. I don't really care what your major is. I was a history major because my last semester at Madison, I could not get a core journalism class that I needed to graduate. So I'm more interested in what you spent your time doing, even if it's working retail, like you had a job and you know what it means to be responsible and show up on time and things like that.
I will totally add that when I am looking at resumes, I'll tell you, so my most recent assistant who I just mentioned, a thing that really stood out in her resume and that she talked about in the interview was the fact that in a summer job of hers was working at an old age home as the bartender. And she spent a great deal of time taking orders, remembering their orders. When the cranky oldsters came at 5 o'clock and they wanted their cocktail, she knew what it was. And that is so, Linda and Emily will relate to this. This is so much like dealing with authors who need things that I was like, you're so hired. And she had the normal educational, background and internships and all of that too, but that really impressed me.
I also often ask students what they're interested in beyond. I see the credentials. They went to University of Wisconsin. They majored in this and that. Obviously, the student jobs are really important in terms of work ethic. And Cassie gave a perfect example how some jobs just really lend themselves well to starting out in publishing. But also, if they were a competitive volleyball player or they've devoted themselves to a serious gardening project for many, many years, whatever it may be. I find that sometimes I hire not only based on the entire resume, but on something that they're really passionate for. And in the interview, they're just going on and on about this thing that they love, that they've really been focused on and determined about. And it can really add something special because in book publishing, what you're hearing from all of us is that we work on so many different kinds of books, different subjects. We're trying to reach different audiences. And so we need people that can get passionate about something, and so that's another thing to keep in mind. Don't be afraid in the other section of your resume to just go all out and tell us what interests you.
I have an editorial meeting story that I always tell. When I was at Hyperion, many, many years ago, this young editorial assistant had a novel in a thriller, and she said it was really, really good, but I don't know, it was like John Grisham, and she was ready to turn it down. And the editorial director sort of leaned forward and said to her, "You better hope you're not turning down the next John Grisham." So that one sticks in my mind a lot. You have to know what is viable and what is salvageable, and you have to have the eye for what's out in the marketplace. And
that is such an incredibly good point. I sometimes tell people when they're thinking about going to publishing, go to a bookstore when you can go to a bookstore, go on Amazon. Every single book there had an editor, had a team of some sort, you know, all of those like oddball interests you have, things that you might be secretly ashamed of or something, like that's actually could be a career path for you. And like, for example, at HarperCollins where I work, you know, a great many of my best friends in the office work for Avon doing romance novels. And they are the most fun people you can even imagine because they sit around editing sex scenes all day long. So anyway, so yeah, that is such a great point, Linda.
I also want to add something. You can have the best education in the world. You can have all the most impressive internships and summer jobs. You can do all of that. But a lot of, for me, also comes down to the cover letter and the resume. You know, Cassie and I are in editorial. One of the things that means is incredible attention to detail at every tiny level. So when I get a cover email that says, "Hey, Emily," and there's no punctuation, I want to work. No, dear Ms. Takutis, you know, or dear Emily, and tell me in your cover. I don't want a generic cover letter. I want to know you did your homework. I want to know you Googled the company. I even frankly want to know you Googled me and you at least looked me up on LinkedIn to see. Keep in mind that the person that you're hoping to work for someday could be your mentor, could be your champion as you move on. You're also almost sort of interviewing them as the person you want to work for a long time. So that impressing in the cover letter and really showing why you want this particular job for this person at this place without any grammatical or punctuation errors, I think is really important. It's sometimes when I hire for editorial assistants, I'll get as many for 50 to 100 resumes. It really just kind of depends on the climate. I probably get rid of half of them immediately just because of that, and gets whittled down very fast. So all of you UW students, I'm sure that's not the case for you. You're all very, very smart, but just something to keep in mind.
And could I add, that is a huge pet peeve of mine, and using the function on the computer to check spelling is not going to cut it. So the way that I was taught to always make sure that you don't have a misspelled word is to read your material backwards. So start at the end and go, and that will catch misspelled words, or those will catch words that are out of context. So you'll catch the use of the wrong there or the wrong where. And yeah, we had interns applied by accident. Someone put it on Indeed, and we had 300 plus resumes, and we eliminated, I'm saying close to 150 because of typos.
That's fantastic advice. And I just want to take a second to plug some of the SuccessWorks resume and cover letter services. You can certainly get those checked over several times by a SuccessWorks advisor or a peer advisor, or look at any of the resources on our website too to make sure that you are not within that 150 resumes that gets tossed out for grammar errors and things like that. Fantastic. This is all such great advice and such great information.